From the Council President's Office, Rebecca Tabb, Kimberly Rubens, and Chief of Staff Michael Huber. To my immediate right is Marguerite Curran, who is staff to the committee. Where's Amaros? Give me 1 second, please. Oh, no, these are someone else's. Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District. Councilman Yitzi Schleifer, 5th District, member of the committee. You see Amaros in there? Okay, Mr. Herbert, right?
Yes, sir.
Please take it away.
Good afternoon again, Mr. Chair, council members. My name is Quentin Herbert. I'm the Director of Human Resources. I'll begin our presentation by introducing several of the members of our leadership team who have come over this afternoon. We have...
And pardon me for 1 second, Mr. Herbert. I'm sorry. Yes, please introduce everyone. And we got the Labor Commissioner, right? Yes. We're going to ask you to keep your presentation to about 10 minutes, and then we'll go to the Labor Commissioner and then take questions from the council. I apologize.
Yes, sir. First, we have our immediate past Assistant Deputy of Administration, Chichi Nyaganash, our Chief of Recruitment and Shared Services, Joanne Ashton, our Assistant Deputy of Operations, Steve Serra, our HR Administrative Officer, Julie Colucci, Chief of Human Resources Information Systems, or HRIS, Tanya Brinkley, Chief of Learning and Development, Sandy Curtis, our Chief of Classification and Compensation, Elisa Underwood Jordan, and our Chief of Communications, Daryl Strange.
I'd like to recognize Council President Scott.
Thank you,
just joined us.
Mr. President, DHR Administration, we'll start with the administration. Service number 770. The Office of Administration is responsible for the agency's overall performance and management, fiscal oversight, including procurement, employment policy development and implementation, employment law and regulatory compliance, strategic communications, and that also houses the Civil Service Commission itself and all civil service rule making. Within administration also exists the Human Resources Information System, HRIS, work unit, which is responsible for maintaining the city's HR information and database systems. And as you can imagine, they've been quite busy these last 3 or 4 weeks. The recommended funding level transfers in 3 positions and transfers out 4 positions. That is existing staff, and it's just to better reflect where they actually work and serve. And the budget maintains the current levels of service within this service. The next service is Employee Benefits, service number 771. And this service is, of course, responsible for administering the city's health and welfare benefit plans for all active employees, retirees, and their dependents according to the terms and conditions of the city's negotiated contracts covering medical plans, dental plans, life insurance, prescription benefits, vision, flexible spending accounts, and unemployment insurance. The Office of Employee Benefits also administers the citywide health and wellness program and the Employee Assistance Program, or EAP. The recommended funding level for this service transfers in 1 position and transfers out 4 positions. Again, that's to better reflect where personnel are assigned. These are all existing personnel. The budget reclassifies a new position that was created in fiscal year 19 to a nutritionist who works in the wellness program. The next service is the DHR Civil Service Management, service number 772. This service is comprised of our Classification and Compensation Office, as well as the Office of Shared Service and Recruitment. The Office of Classification and Compensation is responsible for classifying occupational groups and establishing compensation levels for the positions that comprise the Baltimore City workforce. They also handle reclassifications and creation of new positions. They conduct position, organization, and compensation studies as well. Within the Office of Shared Service and Recruitment, Shared Services team provides HR services to the agencies at their level and ensures consistency and fairness with city policy and employee programs, while the recruitment team standardizes the administrative life cycle for requisitions and candidate selection criteria. And finally, the DHR's Office of Learning and Development, which is service number 773. And this service is the continuing education arm of our agency. It incorporates the highest continuing education and training operational standards to ensure uniform development, strategic implementation, and facilitation within a wide range of learning opportunities to meet the needs of the city's workforce. We align with agency business objectives and support mayoral initiatives. This office also provides learning paths which enable targeted learning for professional development, IT and software, management and supervision, leadership development, city policies, and et cetera, through both classroom and virtual learning opportunities. And so that is the learning and development. At this time, I'll defer to Madam Labor Commissioner.
We've been joined by Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark from the 14th District, Councilman Robert Stokes from the 12th District, Councilman Bill Henry from the 4th District, member of the committee. And I also want to take a moment to recognize our 3 Wells Fargo Fellows from Morgan State University. So we got Jasmine Gray, if you could raise your hand, and Deshaun Hicks, and LaKentia Hicks. Did I say that right? Got it. And they're going to be volunteering this summer, Mr. President and colleagues, with the Upton Planning Committee in Pennsylvania Avenue Main Street. So you may see them in and out of City Hall from time to time. So if you do, please say hello. Madam Labor Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. President, members of the committee. I'm Deborah Moore Carter, the Labor Commissioner for the City of Baltimore. And with me, I have Yvette Brown from my office, who is a Labor Relations Specialist. I'm talking about service number 128, which is labor relations, obviously. So this service negotiates with 8 city unions and 1 professional services organization. And what we do is negotiate the collective bargaining agreements concerning wages, hours, benefits, and other terms and conditions of employment. We oversee the administration of the MOU and studies and make recommendations for established revisions, corrections of city policies and procedures with respect to labor management matters. This year, for FY20, we are currently in negotiations with AFSCME Locals 44, 558, 2202, and the City Union of Baltimore. We have concluded negotiations with the FOP, and the firefighters and fire officer union negotiations will begin in January 2020. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. President?
Thank you. I'll start with HR first. But the question is for both of you. We are currently in the first year of implementation of my equity assessment legislation. I'd like to take a few seconds to ask a few questions to gauge your agency's progress. Have you hired or identified an equity coordinator? And if so, who is the person?
We have not hired an equity coordinator. However, we have a compliance officer. Part of what the policy and compliance team does is to look at equity across the city, both in our agency and across the city. And that person is Tom Broadwater, who's not here.
So follow-up question on that. Does Mr. Broadwater report directly to you?
He does not. He reports to the Chief of Policy and Compliance, Jason Ingram.
So under the law, that's not sufficient. The equity coordinator must be a direct report to you, and based on that, and based on other laws, would also mean that that person would have to be a city resident as well. So we'll just have to follow up on that.
We'll follow up with that. Yes, sir.
I'm not saying that it can't be him, but I'm just saying that it has to be, under the law, the equity coordinator has to be a direct report to the agency head. And secondly, Have you held or scheduled any trainings for your department on equity and inclusion?
Yes, we have.
Can we hear about those?
Sure, Sandy. Come on up.
Hi, Sandy Curtis, Learning and Development. Yes, we have trained several people across the agency to include some people within our own agency, and we will be rolling that out in a larger focus for FY20 for diversity and inclusion. We provide that through, we'll be offering as catalog classes for FY20, but we've been doing that in FY19 as customized programs.
So can you tell us about what those are in a little bit more detail, because there's a very, very distinct difference between diversity and equity. So can you tell us what those trainings are and how they would help the agency comply with the equity assistance law?
Yes, we include our equity in portions of diversity, and also in our, we will be launching non-bias classes for FY20. So I can provide you with the curriculum and an overview of those classes to make sure that that fits what you're wanting.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if we can make that an official request to have HR provide their trainings that they are implementing via lens of equity to us.
Yep. Give me 1 second, Mr. President, because Jeff isn't here.
Yes, sir. I'll just ask my next question while you get ready.
A listing of trainings.
Yep. They should provide the trainings that they are implementing to comply with the equity law.
Just at DHR or citywide?
Well, they're from DHR, but they're going out citywide.
List of training offerings from DHR on equity. Got it?
Yep, and the last follow-up on that is, has the department conducted a baseline analysis of the equity impacts of the agency's existing and proposed actions, meaning policy and budget?
Not to my knowledge. I'd like to get back to that because I'm relatively new in this role.
Oh, I know.
So I
And
can't
welcome,
speak
sir.
I can't speak to what was done before I came, but I'd like to have the opportunity to go back before I answer on the record to make sure that was, completed. Was not
Just a
completed.
word of advice from the council. Don't speak of anything that happened before you came. We're very pleased that you are now here, sir.
Thank you, sir.
But I will just friendly offer up that portion that I'm speaking about has to be completed by October the 17th of this year. So the agency should have trained its own employees and have its baseline analysis by October the 17th. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
My second question. Oh, yeah, and also the equity coordinator has to be identified by that portion too, sorry. So, as again, we're very, very excited to have you here. And since you've been interim director, can you tell us about what concrete steps the department has taken to modernize the city's hiring practices as well as like human resource management?
Sure. Let me just say that some of those are old school approaches, and some of those are more technological. The old school approaches are, again, building relationships. Since I've been sitting in this seat, I have made efforts to build strong relationships with my agency counterparts to understand what their needs are, do needs assessments, and our recruitment team has been working with them to understand what the needs are and where the break points are. One of the things that we have done is to utilize our senior recruiter to actually work with the agency HR practitioners to identify the bottlenecks and stopgaps as well as the hard-to-fill positions, and to create strategies to onboard people more efficiently and effectively. Another thing that I discovered when I got to HR is that there was some misconceptions out in the agencies about what the processing is for the background checks and the like. Joanne Ashton, who is our Chief of Shared Services, has been working with a number of the agency HR practitioners to to unify our processes and make sure we're doing it all the same way so that we don't have hiccups in the system. I'm proud to report that when I took over some months ago, there were 34 positions or vacancies that were classified as hard to fill vacancies. With the efforts of the senior recruiter, we've been able to actually hire in 16 of those. And we hope to, within the next few months, to work with the agencies to fill those other vacancies as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mira, for Service 770, I noticed that there are no performance measures. Is that par for the course for the administration component for departments?
Yes, none of the admin services have performance measures.
Okay, that's what I figured. Thank you. I'm good. Councilwoman Sneed?
Can you tell me how many successful candidates are eliminated from consideration due to drug testing?
Offhand, I could not tell you how many candidates are eliminated for drug testing. Since I've been here, I can't think that I can't recall any specific case where a candidate was denied employment because of the results of a drug test. I know that it does happen. How frequently, I would have to do a deeper dive to be able to give you that information.
And I'm wondering how many were, like, if we can make this a question, since you have to do a deeper dive, if we can break it down from marijuana versus like other substances.
We can try. Some of that information is subject to HIPAA. What I can do is to talk to our lab and determine if we can put together a spreadsheet of how many, you're talking about just new hires, correct?
In general, yeah. It doesn't have to be, yes, new hires, absolutely, yes.
Okay, we can do a deeper dive to try to
Because
get
I'm
that
just wondering
information to
how
you.
many we reject just based on, so when it comes back, I guess, they don't say if they're tested at, I don't know, whatever drug testing facility, they just say decline. It doesn't say for maybe marijuana. It doesn't go into that type of detail.
At the agency level, when the employee is informed that they test positive, they are told what they are tested positive for, and I believe the agency also receives what the test was positive for.
Oh, okay, so yeah.
Right. The agency only receives that it was positive, and the employee receives what substance they were positive for.
Got it. Okay. Are we considering, with the legalization of medical marijuana in Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, as well as for recreational use in the District of Columbia, has there been any thought to eliminating drug testing for more positions?
No. In fact, according to the National Drug-Free Workplace Alliance, 75% of the almost 18 million illicit drug users 18 and over are currently employed somewhere. And employers conduct drug tests for a whole host of reasons. The biggest one is safety, particularly if we have employees who are performing safety-sensitive or dangerous jobs, whether it's driving vehicles or operating machinery. We want to ensure the safety of not only our employees, but also the citizens. Other reasons to test could include reducing injury, risk mitigation, improving productivity, and controlling insurance costs. So we haven't considered abolishing substance abuse testing, even with the recreational drug use that's available in DC and the passage of medical marijuana. What we have been doing is that where there are individuals who test positive for marijuana and they have the marijuana card, we have been considering those cases on an ad hoc basis, on a case-by-case basis, and the determining factor is what the employee will be doing. If it's a safety-sensitive job, then we engage them in the interactive process to determine whether or not their use of the marijuana per the prescription or doctor's orders would inhibit their ability to perform their essential job functions.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm good. I asked my two, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Henry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Actually, my first question was I wanted to follow up on Councilwoman Sneed's in terms of is your office capable of elaborating on the ROI from drug testing? Like where, why, are you just drug testing because you've been told to by someone else in city government, or is that a policy of DHR?
It actually is a city policy. We have a substance abuse control policy, which controls when employees are drug tested. And there are only certain times in an employee's career when they are drug tested. It's either at hire, if they're in a safety-sensitive position, they have random urinalysis, and if there is a reasonable suspicion test where an employee is exhibiting signs of intoxication, they can be SACO'd and ultimately sent for a test. With that said, it is an industry best practice to have a substance abuse policy with whatever employing agency is in operation. So
it's an agency, I'm sorry, it's an industry-wide best practice
for human resources practice.
to test all applicants pre-employment regardless of what their work is going to be.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Then the second question is just a follow-up, and I know this is before your time, so if you need to get back to us, I understand. But in 2017, the Labor Committee held a hearing about moving more contractors to full-time employment, and I wanted to know, how is the city actually doing on that goal?
I will need to look into that further. What I can tell you is that we have been working with agencies who have been utilizing contract specialists on a long-term basis and using data from how long they've been using them and what jobs they're actually doing for job creation. For example, we recently created approximately 60-some positions in the police department. Many of those positions were previously occupied by contract specialists. We are also looking and working with the Labor Commissioner and looking at how agencies use temporary positions and how we can better leverage vacancies that we currently have in the agencies to bring our temporary workers into full-time positions.
Do you recall what kind of contract specialists the police department was using that have been converted to full-time hires?
Can we get back to you on that?
I'm fine with you getting back to us on both of those. Mr. Chair, does that count as requests to go on the list, or is that a different level of?
1 second. Okay, what's the request?
So the first one was, how is the city doing on its goal of moving more contractors to full-time employment positions with the city? And then the second.
Hang on.
Sorry.
Status of city's efforts to transition contractors to FTEs. Okay.
And then the second one was what contract specialists were recently transitioned to FTEs in the police department. And I would hope that that would include how many of them as well.
Sure.
Sure. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Which contract specialists were recently transitioned to FTEs and BPD? Specifically, how many? Correct, Councilman? Which contract specialists were recently transitioned to FTEs within BPD, and specifically how many?
Yes. Thank you.
Councilwoman Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Mr. Herbert.
Hello, Councilwoman.
Hi, Labor Commissioner. My apologies to both of you for walking in the middle of, walking in late. I'm sorry. So, Mr. Herbert, you and I had a long conversation, and it was very encouraging, and I just want to ask you about it. and here's what it is. In two situations I'm aware of in the police department, we have groups of employees who have a compensation problem in terms of equity. Well, one group are the dispatchers, and that's kind of a union. That's sort of up your alley, but the problem is in human resources. I mean, that's not what the problem is. The solution lies there, because the study so what happened was that operators got a raise, but dispatchers did not, and there's a difference in their salaries that was now no longer maintained. So all these operators trained to become dispatchers said, wait a minute, I'm going the wrong way. And so the dispatchers were like, whoa, what happened? So I know it is in your shop, quote unquote, to go back to the study that was already done, focus on that issue, and try to come to solve it, so that the differential, long established, that I think everyone acknowledges, is resumed. And just let me say what the other one is, and then.
Sure.
So we talked about that, and it's been, this has been going on now for a while with Cub to try to fix this. And so that's why I think you said, I know you did, that by the end of this calendar year, you should have the information you need so that the city can take a step. The reason I'm raising this, and the next one at a budget hearing, is that if we get halfway through a fiscal year and we have solutions to this, and to the next one I'll take a minute to describe, which you already know, then we need to make sure the money's there so that transition can occur without waiting for another fiscal year. So the other one is, again, the police department, Officer Odell, who I've never met, but he sort of oversees that the group of
Forensic scientists.
Yeah, forensic scientists. Thank you so much. Exactly, who were in a band that was studied for salary increases. That was run. It's been 8 years. 8 years, I'm told, since the original study was done, and people got raises, and a whole bunch of forensic scientists in the department fell out of the what they call band. And so I think you're very familiar with who they are, what job titles, and what individuals. But they've gone now years without being brought up comparable to the other people in their band. And so, again, you were familiar with this just shortly after coming into your job, and felt that you could pinpoint, or people could pinpoint exactly what was wrong in that band. It's not like a mystery that needs a new study, and come up with a solution in that place by the end of this calendar year. So I would just said all that to say, what's the status, and do you have any idea whether we have covered in the fiscal 2020 budget the money that would have to be added or included for those raises of those two populations to be awarded?
It's a loaded question.
Well, I didn't mean it to be loaded, because I thought you knew the answer.
I do, but it requires a little bit of contextualizing to answer the question.
That's fine.
I'll handle the dispatchers first. The dispatchers and the 911 operators are represented by CUB. At one point, the dispatchers were classified higher than the 911 operators. That was at a time when the scope of work for the 911 operators is different than it is now. 911 operators, at one point, they would answer the phone, fire, police, or ambulance, and transfer the call. Now the 911 operators are required to have certifications. They're required to be trained in CPR. They walk people through that on 911 calls, and they were saying that we need to be looked at because our job has changed dramatically over the years. What happened with the 911 operators is that there was a decision point made some years ago that the 911 operators would move under the direction and supervision of the fire department. The dispatchers stayed under the direction of the police department. The fire department requested to have the 911 operators studied. There was no like request made by the police department at that time. As a result of the study, the 911 operators were reclassified and received a pay increase. The dispatchers at that time raised concern that, hey, our pay needs to be looked at as well. There is pending an RFP to have those positions studied, the dispatchers studied, along with the forensic scientists, and I'll get to them in a moment as well. So to answer the first part of your question, we will have an answer to that question about what should be done with their salary by the end of the year. With respect to the budget, that's going to be a agency-specific question, whether or not the BPD, and I can tell you that Mr. Odell has told me that he has money in his budget for the forensic scientists.
Okay.
I can't speak to whether or not those who the dispatchers report to have had that money in their budget to implement any recommendations.
And do you know how much money we're talking about I think he knows how much it is for, I think Officer Odell, Lieutenant Odell knows how much money. If he says it's there, it's there. But I don't know if anybody knows what the cost would be for a differential to raise the salaries of the dispatchers. And
Right.
this is disappointing because it feels like a setback in the understanding I had about what happened. There's been a study. There was a study. We shouldn't have to start a study all over again for dispatchers.
There was not a study
There wasn't?
of the dispatchers done, no ma'am. There was a study of the 911 operators, and that study was implemented. After that, the union requested that we study the dispatchers.
And they said there were, but okay, we'll talk about this later.
And so we have an RFP pending to have the dispatchers studied because the classification and compensation team is currently finishing a salary study of about 80% of the AFSCME bargaining unit, and they didn't have the bandwidth to do both studies simultaneously. So there's an RFP that's going out to do the study for the dispatchers as well as the forensic scientists. Jumping down to the forensic scientists,
Will you be able to, I'm sorry, will you be able to keep the deadline nonetheless
yes,
for having a salary recommendation by the end of the calendar year?
absolutely.
Thank you.
And with the forensic scientists, just to provide a little further context, in a past life, I worked for the Labor Commissioner's office, and in the life before that, I worked at the law department. And so I actually represented the city in a lawsuit that was brought by these same forensic scientists, and I'm intimately familiar with the history behind it. Under former Mayor Dixon, there was a request to have the latent print examiners and firearms examiners studied because there were only a handful of them in the city. They have a very unique skill set, and they are in demand all over the country, and we couldn't keep anybody. And we had more of the other forensic scientists at that time. And so the decision was made by that administration to study the latent print examiners and firearms examiners, who were all in that forensic science family. And the result of that was an increase to the latent print examiners and firearms examiners. They were actually moved from CUB to MAPS level positions as a result of that study. And the initial intent was to get back and study them. And that had not materialized to this point. Again, they are included in the RFP to be studied. They will be studied by the end of this calendar year.
But there were mix-ups within, according to people in that division, there were mix-ups within forensic scientists 2, 3, and 4 in drug analysis, in the drug analysis unit, it wasn't simply just those two categories of job titles. There was a band that had other people in it that picked up raises while some of their colleagues did not, depending on, despite years of experience, et cetera. And so it's sort of like a mishmash, and so it's not just, they've done this study. Again, this study has been done of the forensics and of the people that have been waiting for some fairness in the equity of the salaries being paid among the different kinds of forensic scientists.
Understood, and some of that comes from, they were looked at, and many of them were moved into MAPS categories as opposed to CUB categories, and the negotiated rate increases, as the labor commissioner can discuss better than I, they negotiate the rate increases that they get for each bargaining unit. So for those who were put in MAPS level positions, they were a part of the MAP study, and there were those who felt that they should have been increased even more to be in the band, again, with the latent print examiners and firearms examiners. I'm very familiar with the issue. Those two particular classifications have a lower educational requirement, but they make more than the forensic scientists in the drug analysis unit, which require at least a bachelor's degree. And the reason that was is, again, at that time, there were only a handful of firearms examiners and latent print examiners, and we had a huge backlog of cases because they weren't being analyzed. And so the decision was made to study those positions, to get those two positions more aligned with the market. And now we're going back and looking at the other forensic scientists and looking at how they measure up to the market as well.
And you'll have those answers by the end of this year? Basically, they tell me, and I've never asked Lieutenant or Odell about it, but they tell me it's not just that two categories were raised, it's that some people in other categories got raised, and people with more experience didn't, and that it wasn't something I just stumbled over. It was something the police department itself, through this leader, has been saying. He's been trying to get it straightened out for years. And they've got people there that aren't being paid what the guy next to them or the woman next to them is being paid. They're doing the same job.
Can I also give one caveat with that?
Yeah.
Sometimes what agencies will do is they will bring in a new person at a higher level than the people that are already working there, and we advise against that. And so what happens is that sometimes agencies will create this monster where they onboard new people at higher rates, and you have them working next to people who have been with the city for 10 or 15 years, and they're making more than them. So some of it is not going to be resolved by a study. It's going to be resolved by agencies actually following the advice that we give with regard to onboarding. And so I think it's a two-headed animal. It's not just the study piece. It's also agencies following the guidance that we give from HR with respect to what they bring people at and onboarding them.
Okay, just let me finish, and thank you for saying I'm a little worried now. I thought we had it under control, that there was going to be reports about these two different groups by the end of the calendar year.
And there will be.
And so that they have some kind of answer to, and certainly on the part of the second group, they have some kind of answer after all these really years of when the study started. And I agree, some people get brought in at a higher salary than other people with more experience and more years and better education. Well, they shouldn't. The people that have been there should be raised up, and I don't think new people should be brought in for more money than people who've been there and are doing a good job with the same credentials. So that's a different discussion. But let's not make it a discussion about these people in forensics. Let's just help get some equity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and thank you for listening to me rant and rave, because they're ranting and raving at me for a year.
Understood, ma'am.
Thank you.
Jeff, I sent you 3 items. What are we up to?
I'm sorry, 3 items?
Yep.
I've got request for council president, listing of training offerings from DHR and equity, and then 2 from Councilman Henry.
Okay.
Status of city's efforts to transition contractors to FTEs, and which contract specialists were recently transmitted to FTEs within BPD, and specifically how many.
What are we up to total? 25?
I think brings us to 26, actually.
26, okay. Mr. President?
Correct.
And then followed by Councilman Stokes.
Mr. Director, just a follow-up on the councilwoman's point that she was just making, and something that I would like to have you, as the HR Director for the city, clarify if you can, but also to point out that this, and for the administration, that maybe this is something to be considered. So tomorrow, everyone knows that via the consent decree, we are mandated to do a staffing study for everything involving the police department. I don't see why the dispatchers wouldn't fall underneath that and cannot fall underneath that mandated consent decree, because this staffing study is everything, every single function of the police department to make sure it's properly staffed and properly resourced. So am I wrong in thinking that this could be included in that?
No, and that's why we're doing the study. We're putting out an RFP to have it done. They're going to look at the dispatchers, and we should have a...
No, I mean separate from that. So what I'm trying to do is not us spend the same dollar 4 and 5 different times as the city likes to often do. We have to have a consent decree mandated staffing study for both the sworn and civilian sides of the police department, of which it is at the BOE tomorrow morning for our approval. Mm-hmm. What I'm asking you and your expertise is, can we in that include, and should we, to me it should be included, what we're discussing now, as this is a civilian function of the police department?
Council President, Director, to intercede. We are already on our way per the new state mandate or state law for 911. We are engaging with the consultant to do a staffing study for all the telecommunications responsibilities, because the new funding formula could potentially cover parts of both fire and police dispatch. So we have asked the consultant, as part of their scope of work, to look at it holistically across. So besides the stat, we are on track to get that to the Board of Estimates next month.
Okay.
What thing?
So, 1 second, Councilwoman. So, Mr. Ramos, you're saying, so this is going to be separate from the police department staffing study itself. There's going to be a study based on the laws passed at the state, the updates to 911, what do we call it? I forgot, the 21st century 911 or whatever it's called.
Yes, sir.
And we're going to have to meet regulations. So you're going to have a separate RFP to handle that will include total.
Yeah, we have a vendor selected already. We're just finalizing the scope of work for. It was specific to 911, which is part of the state laws that we have to do a staffing study. We figured that it was worth the investment to look at it more holistically, as these positions have a lot in common in some cases, and in some cases the staff will jump around depending on the salary. So we'll be reaching out to DHR as well to figure out if there's maybe some classification so that we're not duplicating efforts. But that is a state mandate. The state numbers board will be compensating us for it.
Okay, thank you.
So I will follow up with finance.
So what, Mr. Ramos, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Chair, what I would like to have is add that to the list for you guys to provide the RFP for which you're going to be analyzing 911 dispatching call takers in general, but also explain to us how this differs a little bit from the BPD staffing study, and if there'll be overlap of the two.
Okay, I will coordinate with DHR about the consent decree related study and share with you our scope of work, as well as a study that was completed for another Maryland jurisdiction by the vendor.
Thank you. Mr. Amarosa, did you caught the tail end of that?
I caught the tail end, if you don't mind repeating quickly.
So, Councilwoman Clark was speaking about the difference in call taker, 911 call taker, and dispatcher pay, and when saying that there has been asked for a study to be completed to analyze that, I followed up by saying simply that tomorrow we will be expected to approve a court-mandated staffing study for BPD, and why can't that be included in that staffing study? Mr. Ramos chimed in and said that because of the state laws and changes around 911, the system of 911 in the state of Maryland in its entirety, they have to issue a RFP to figure out how our system can be analyzed. The request is for that to be provided to us so that we can see the scope of work, and he also is going to provide an example from another jurisdiction.
Right, the study or the RFP?
The study's not there yet. The
Right.
RFP and the scope of the RFP, and he has an example from another location in Maryland, I guess, or someone else that has used the vendor that they are selecting, so that we can make sure and be sure before that comes to BOE, I can assure the councilwoman that it will cover exactly what she's asking.
Question related to Mr. Ramos, may I, Mr. Chair?
Councilwoman Clark.
Mr. Ramos, we have a December 31st, 2019 deadline on information coming out for these two groups of police employees. Is your RFP going to make that last for another year?
No, that wouldn't deal with the classification or the compensation issue. This is simply looking at what is the right staffing model and what would be covered under the new funding provided from the State Numbers Board.
Thank you. So Human Resources is left to do its work and to meet its deadlines.
I believe so.
So, Mr. Director, just to follow up then for you and Mr. Amoros, the second request is to see, and this is one that you would have to find out post haste because BOE is tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, if in the staffing study that is required by the consent decree, we will be looking at this portion of the department's functionality, including resources, which include salaries, because we know that resources is going to be a heavy part of what they're doing if you look at the RFP and what they're requesting. So to me, this should be included in that. So let's try to figure that out today.
Mr. President, actually, if DHR are you able to respond to that today by COB?
I would need to get with finance and see what the RFP for the staffing study looks like. Typically, a staffing study will look at how you use your resources and will tell you how many call takers you need, how many dispatchers you need. It typically is not a classification and compensation study that will say this is what grade they should be and this is what they should be paid. It's my understanding that they look at two different things. However, I do understand Council President's question. If there is language in the RFP for the staffing study that includes a assessment of classification and compensation, then it may be that we're duplicating efforts and we may be able to see some savings in that.
We will make sure that we are not duplicating efforts.
Yeah.
But the staffing study related to 911 is exactly that. How many per your workload? What is the appropriate amount of resources? Separate and apart are the compensation issues and classification.
So yeah, I just said that because actually one of the things on the agenda is F in that particular contract is the BPDs and the city's existing and projected resources as it relates to staffing for them. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Stokes.
Before I begin, I just, on behalf of my colleagues, would like to give my condolences to Ms. Trina Cunningham, who was a city employee who unfortunately passed away yesterday and who worked hard here in Baltimore City. But Mr. Herbert, I just have a question. I know the colleagues here, we have been getting phone calls before you came on board about the environment over at your office. Can you, and you shared it with me, can you just share what steps you've made to make that a working environment more fruitful than it was before you came on board?
Sure. When I came over to DHR last August, I will say that there were some issues that I had. The staff was hesitant. I have an amazing staff. They were used to having a supervisory staff that did not necessarily allow them to perform their functions to the best of their capabilities. Some of the things that I've done since I've been there have been to initiate monthly all-hands meeting. That's a meeting that I have with all the staff of HR, from the senior team down to the administrative staff that answer the telephone. And what we do in that meeting is I provide them information of things that are going on in the agency, personnel changes, so that everybody is aware of what's going on in the agency, which was one of the concerns. Within a couple of months of getting there, we did an engagement study of all of the employees in HR. Typically, an engagement study, you would look to see if you could get 60 or 65% participation. That would give you a relatively good sample set. We actually had over 85% of the staff that participated in the study. Some of the major concerns that we saw were around communication, especially from the top down, and how things were communicated to staff, and also recognition. So around the recognition, what we have done is we have used our monthly all-hands meeting to have a Champion of the Month award. And we have a trophy as well as certificates, and I provide gift cards to those employees to recognize their hard work and what they do in our agency and how they keep us going. We also have sort of a memorial outside of the training lab where we have a clock that has 12 spaces representing the 12 places on the clock. Each month's champion, a picture will go in that picture frame, so that at the end of the year, all of those champions of the month, anybody who comes to DHR for training will see who the champions of the month are. We have found that has increased engagement tremendously. Employees are eager to recommend their colleagues and coworkers for that award every month. And when we recognize that employee, it's good to know that people see your work and appreciate what you do. And so we have seen engagement improve within the agency. Also, I have an open door policy. I think if you were to ask any of my staffers, outside of my presence, they would tell you that they can come into my office at any time that I'm there and bring me any concern, and I work to resolve it. I don't have a traditional org chart per se. We have an org chart, but I will reach down if necessary, and likewise, those who are below can reach up if they need to elevate something to me. I believe that communication is what allows the agencies to produce their work at a high level and provide the service to the agencies that they deserve and that we've been hired to do. And so I think that improving the lines of communication, recognizing the employees has not only improved the atmosphere, but I think that it has improved the way in which we provide the service. We've received a number of compliments from our sister agencies about how the human resources services have been provided over the last 6 months or so. So I think that to answer your question, those types of things and those types of changes are the types of things that have allowed us to improve the environment.
Well, thank you. So that means we should not be getting any more calls because you have taken some great steps over it. But I also want to mention that I'm really excited about a year ago, I introduced a resolution about apprenticeships, and been working with the city school system and BCCC September this year through May of 2022. Mervo and Emerson West High Skills Center will be open in the evenings for young people 18 to 24 years old, medical coding, pre-construction, diesel mechanic. And the reason why I say that to you is because I would like to sit down with you in terms of how we can get our young people into some apprenticeship through your office if it's possible, or just bring you into and let you know what we're doing over at Mervo and Emerson Westside Skills Center. I haven't shared all of it with my colleagues, Councilman Mary Pat and Councilman Burnett, because we were still in some negotiations with space with the school system, so they agreed. I'm excited about that, but I'd like to partner with you and see how we can really open that pathway to your office to young people that's 18 to 24 years old.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Sneed.
Thank you. I'm just curious of how many vacancies you have in your department.
It's between 4 and 5.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
We've been able to staff up in the last 7 months or so.
Do we have anyone that teaches classes around sexual harassment?
Yes. The Training, Learning and Development Division works with our Policy and Compliance Division to educate employees around the existing city policies related to sexual harassment. One of the things that we're looking to do is to also increase our ability to provide training via technology, having videos that are more scenario-based as opposed to the regimented and rigid classroom sessions that often are not very productive. So we're looking at having the policies made available to the employees as they currently are, but to provide more scenario-based trainings via technology to kind of drive home the points behind the policies.
Do you know if we've gotten any complaints recently?
I can't. Sexual harassment.
Sexual
They would have gone to the Mayor's Office of Civil Rights. I can say that we conducted, that I know of, 2 investigations from other agencies in the time that I've been in HR since last August. But that's not including any complaints that may have gone to the Office of Civil Rights that I may not be aware of.
Last question, unrelated, just more so of a comment to say that I feel like the women that are backing you are all women. Normally I'm asking, like, where are the women? But you guys are definitely representative of this office. So it's good to see you guys.
We practice equity.
Councilman Slifer.
Yeah, my questions are for the Labor Commissioner. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Can you just give a little bit more overview, some clarity on what your agency does besides the union negotiations?
Well, the union negotiations are the biggest thing. However, we are also, when I discussed contract administration, we are also hearing officers for the grievance procedure. Every contract has a grievance procedure, so we're the hearing officer at the 3rd step for most unions and the 4th step for the firefighters and fire officers. Since the charter was changed, I believe in 2009, we're also hearing officers for terminations. It used to be the Civil Service Commission only, but now the Office of the Labor Commissioner will also be the hearing officer for terminations, suspensions of more than 30 days, and involuntary transfers. So we also conduct labor management committees. We're responsible for facilitating those. And I thought about it when someone mentioned Ms. Cunningham, because very recently we went to Patapsco with Cub and AFSCME, so I could actually picture those tanks and those kinds of things. I have also taken the unions to the other facilities, because I think through labor management that it's important to know what other employees are doing, because when you know what they're doing, you'll know how your job impacts what someone else does. For example, when we went to the treatment plants, the employees were talking about a lack of chemicals. So when you take the procurement people out to the treatment plants, they understand that by not acting swiftly in some instances, that you're impacting the work of other people. We also participate along with the Labor Commissioner in the apprenticeship program. We do that, and we also answer questions on a daily basis, sometimes minute by minute, on various aspects of the contract.
Gotcha. And so when was this the city ordinance done that created this office? Do you know?
The office was created, the Office of the Labor Commissioner was created in 1968. And the issue that I talked about regarding suspensions of 30 days or more, involuntary demotions and terminations, I think the charter was changed, don't quote me, but I believe it was 2009, and it was at the request of the City Union of Baltimore.
Gotcha. So is your office advisory to the mayor on those situations, or can you guys actually overturn a firing, or
We can overturn a termination.
you could overturn?
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, and I noticed that for last year's budget, you guys had like close to 30% of your budget was contractual services. So what are some of those services that you guys contract with?
It was primarily for attorneys to assist us with the negotiations process.
Okay, so the attorneys are in-house through the law department for those?
Well, this year, what I'm doing for the civilian unions is that I'm actually using the law department and contracting with them to do the negotiations with me.
Okay, so then what, for this year, what are the, what's it, 166,000, what is that projected to be? Is that also for outside attorneys?
Yes, it will. January 1st, we'll start negotiations with fire, the firefighters and fire officers, and we will be using an outside attorney for that because we're looking for some specific changes to help the fire department with some of their issues. For example, get a handle on overtime.
And so on these negotiations, you're representing the city? What?
Correct.
You're representing the city. I gotcha. Okay. And as far as you're mentioning about different disputes, so I've heard like a few different agencies throughout the, I guess our 2 days now on hearings, they handle different disputes. How do people know who to go to for what kind of disputes? Like you're mentioning you guys handle some as well. So how would one know who to go to?
Well, our handling of disputes are contractual. As I said, every memorandum of understanding has a grievance procedure, as well as we have a city grievance procedure. And the grievance procedure gives you the first step, for example, is your immediate supervisor. Second step is the next level supervisor. Third step is the Office of the Labor Commissioner. And by the way, we also do mediations, because I felt several years ago that many items are not grievable, but because they're not grievable, it doesn't mean that it'll go away. So we use mediation as a tool as well to resolve workplace disputes.
Okay. All right, thank you. And just one other thing, I was looking up just to get some background information, and I would just recommend that somebody take a look at the mission statement on the website to make some edits to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions? All right, thank you all very much. We are in recess till 2:30.
And I was like, it's pretty nice. I really think.